Hello and welcome to another episode in the podcast حكايتي حكاية. Today we have a guest with us who is novelist Hamza Koudri. Hamza is a writer and he has written in 2021 a novel in English, the novel entitled Sand Rose. The novel won the third place in the Island Prize, which is organized by the Holland House Books and the Caravan Press. The 5 winners of the prize would have their novel published in Britain and in South Africa. Hamza, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today, Jalil.
You are welcome, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation. So let's start with a quick question concerning the novel and the publication. Has it been published yet?
No, not yet. So the competition for the Island Prize competition is for first-time authors and published authors. And so the plan hopefully is to get it published in the middle of next year, 2023.
Middle of next year, right. So, of course, the one of the conditions in participating in this prize is that you participate with a novel that has not been published before, right?
Correct. And you need to be an unpublished author as well. So it's a great way to discover first-time authors who usually struggle to get their first book into publication. And so this is one of the objectives of especially in Africa. So this is one of the objectives of the competition.
Yeah, and by the way, this is the Island Prize is an African prize that is for African writers, right?
Correct. So it's organized by, like I said, Holland Books, which is a British publisher in partnership with Caravan Press, which is a South African house. And the jury are all African authors from different countries, and all of the competitors, the people who made entries, over 100 people from all across the continent. But yeah, it's for African authors.
That's good. So congratulations again. I congratulated you before, so I never congratulate you enough for this achievement because, well, first of all, it's written in English, and we are happy that we have novelists who write in English. And we'll talk about this a bit later on, of course, because this is very important. And because we love literature in general, and anyone who wins a prize in any language, and he is an Algerian or someone that I know, I'm very happy, of course, for him or her. So this is quite an achievement, and this is why حكايتك حكاية, right?
Correct.
So Hamza is, of course, with us here today to discuss this particular achievement. But before we go into that, before we take a deep dive into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your education at the university, and about your professional career?
Sure. So I started with a degree in English, literature and civilization at the University of Algiers too, in Bouzaria in Algiers. And so during that time, I actually started teaching English with a private language school in Algiers. And that also got me, so I think throughout my career, I did a lot of education and work at the same time. So when I was...
So you started teaching while you were studying?
Correct. I think in my second year, my second year of university, I started teaching and also taking a lot of teacher training, and that helped me a lot in terms of improving my training skills, also my ability to work with other professionals, especially in the world of education. And I started to attend a lot of workshops and conferences, and that expanded my network immensely. So that was very helpful for me. When I finished my BA degree, I started immediately into my master's, also in English language, literature and civilization.
I was specializing. Did you graduate with the licence?
Initially a licence, but then I went directly into a master's degree.
When did you graduate with the licence?
The licence was 2011.
11. Okay.
Yes, and then I went right into the master's degree program, and then I was especially specializing in American literature. I worked a lot on Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which was really nice to work on.
That's a very nice book. Do you think that that novel had like and the writer had like an influence on you, on the way you think about certain issues, or in your writing style, which we'll come to in a few minutes?
I think so. I think I worked a lot on my thesis, my master's thesis on To Kill a Mockingbird. So I read it a lot. I read a lot of criticism about it, and a lot of other people said about it. But I think mostly the reason I was drawn to it was because I really love reading historical fiction. Which is basically a novel written in the past, and it tells you a story of characters, it also tells you a story of a certain place or country or
sure.
And so that was one reason I was actually really attracted to it. And I love the way Harper Lee delves into the whole history, especially in terms of racism, social class, and even gender norms in the 1930s Alabama. And I think that definitely influenced my writing, because I also like to tell a story about characters, but also a certain town and a certain place. And coming to think of it, also my novel is set in 1930s Busada. So that can be considered.
Well, that can be considered an influence there. And concerning your master's dissertation and the novel, what did you study in particular?
So
like
it was very interesting.
Or
the theme, I started first looking at racism in the novel, and so how Harper Lee, especially it was a novel that was published in 1960s, but that was like the time of a lot of the movements, especially the freedom rights and Martin Luther King, and it tells the story of a racist. It was a story of like a black man who was accused wrongly in the 1930s Alabama, and
so you were interested in the racism, right? It was a thematic analysis or study.
Initially, yes, and then what was interesting about my thesis is I wrote two different dissertations in a way, because once I finished it, I worked with my supervisor, and then I think, I was done. I was just ready to almost submit. And then she's like, well, I have an idea. Why don't we, talk differently, sort of like reorganize the whole thing. And so I took a whole year off, went to the United States on a fellowship program, the Humphrey Fellowship Program.
You did?
What's that?
I said you went into that program, the Humphrey.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
In the middle of my master's program, so it was like 2015, 2016, and so I basically gave up on the thesis. But then when I went back, I sort of like took the time and finished it one more time, which was like a second one. And so in the second version, which I really liked, so I'm grateful for that decision, even though it took many years. I ended up, not just talking about racism, but I was talking about different layers of segregation in general. So I was talking about race segregation, racial segregation, class segregation, so between the different classes, even among the white people, and then gender segregation as well. And then I actually devoted a little chapter for just historicity in the novel, because I'm such a big fan of history. So I do believe that it ended up being a much better product at the end.
Well, can you talk to me about your professional career? You said you went to the United States in the scholarship. Was that the start of your professional career, or did you, as you said, start before like a teacher?
Yeah, so I started first as a teacher, 2008. I worked for 4 years for a language school, which was really, I think, probably the best career starter I could ever think of, because not only was I really getting the chance to really improve my language skills, both written and oral. The best way to learn anything is to teach it. And so I think that was very good. And then we also got a lot of training. I think for 4 years, I never stopped attending training every single week, at least 2 hours every single week. And then also at one point we ended up sort of like sharing our model teacher training with other schools through the British Council, through other organizations, attending conferences, actually leading workshops in conferences. And by that age, I started at the age of 18. I think I remember feeling like even directors who attended some of the trainings, you didn't tell them your age unless they asked, because then they would just assume like you're 30 or something. And I did look 30.
Well, from this narrative of your career so far, and from your activities on social media, you are very active. So the question that comes to my mind is, how did you find time to write?
Very, very easy. I mean, it's very simple.
Is it easy? I see some people who start writing their novels. They like write, I don't know, 20 pages or something like that, and then they stop because they have so many other things to do and they can't focus on the task. And writing is a very daunting task. It's not an easy one. So what was your method concerning writing in the midst of all of the different activities, and especially the different duties that you have? That is, you are part of an NGO, you have many different responsibilities. I see you active all the time, Allah يبارك. So this is something that you have to do in a way, that is your work at word learning. So how do you find the time to do something like writing, and especially writing a novel?
I get asked that question a lot. I think everybody who hears that I wrote a novel, the first question is when. before
so people who know you, people who know you asked you that question.
So many people. I think a lot of times it's the first question.
So you have a secret method there.
Well, I think that's something I did struggle with a lot. I think I went throughout my life. Each time it's something I love to do, writing, and then definitely I struggle like any other aspiring writer to find the time for it. But I think the best advice that I ever got from established authors, either in person, because I've had the chance to meet some of them in person, but also through online blogs or videos or anything that I've watched or courses. I think the best advice is to find a process and respect it. And I think that's something I'm really good at, is discipline. So I think once and that's what the tip is, you need to be fanatic about the process. What that means is you need to find the place and the time and the day and time of the day where you can really isolate yourself, no distractions, and then give it at least, even if it's half an hour or 1 hour. For some people, I heard so many success stories of people, finding half an hour during lunchtime in a corner office, or in the middle of the night where the kids go to sleep, or in the morning or on weekends. But then the key is respect it no matter what. You respect it as if you gave somebody else an appointment, and then there's no way you can let it go. And
so for you, was it the early morning or was it late at night?
For me, I think if I want to do anything for me personally, it has to be in the morning. I have to wake up at 5 in the morning, and so I use it a lot.
Really early, 5.
5 in the morning is my process, and so I started to really enjoy doing that, because if nobody ever wakes up in the morning to send you an email, or calls you or send you a message, you're really alone. At least in my network.
How much time would you give daily to that? To write in at 5?
I try to give it at least 2 hours.
2 hours.
At least 2 hours a day. And that worked for my thesis, because also when I was struggling between my work and my other duties to find time to, especially write the second version of my thesis for my master's degree, I was doing it at, I would wake up at 5 in the morning, either stay at home and just write on it, or work on it, or go to the office. I would be at the office at 6
So
o'clock.
this is a discipline that you have developed before, right?
Yes, and when it worked for me, and then I continued all through it. So even if I want to do sports, I love to swim, so I like to swim in the morning, and then that's the only time that I can stick to my process, because I know there's going to be no cancellations, nothing that's going to distract me. Nobody's going to ever give me a meeting or appointment at 6:30 in the morning. So I wake up at 5. I'm in the pool at 6:30. I leave at 7:30 and I get to work. On other days, I write, and so I do that at least 5 days a week, sometimes 6. I wake up either to write or to do, to go swimming or to do something for me personally, and that works. And so
So I guess my next question is, did you have any experience with writing before? That is like writing for pleasure or just like a hobby, or was the novel, I mean, apart from your thesis, of course, or was the novel, the one that we are discussing today, was it the first attempt at like writing for pleasure or creative writing, I mean?
No, definitely not my first attempt. I think of writing more of storytelling, like telling stories, and I think I've been telling one form or another of a story since I was a kid. I think I used to develop like those stories even when I used to work. Like I think my earliest memories is when I had like animal figurines, and then I had like a bunch of them, and then I would put them in scenes, and then I would each time imagine a different scene or like the same scene again and again until I'm satisfied with it and go. And then when I started reading little kid stories, and then as soon as I started writing, I would put like just like A4 papers, like fold them and then staple them, and then start drawing ugly drawings and then write stories on them. They were all, I would not want to show them to anybody. I still have some of them, but I wouldn't show them to anyone.
Well, they seem cute from the way you are describing them. They seem cute.
They're definitely cute, but they're so ugly as well. So they're not ready for the world. And then I think as I grew up, I started to I think imitate anything that I see in terms of a story. So like if I was there would be periods when I was reading a lot, and so I would write a lot similar to what I was reading. Or sometimes I would be watching TV, and then I would sort of like also imitate some of those stories. I think I remember, especially when I was in middle school and high school, I think I wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages. Some of them looked like soap operas or fantasy books, like sort of like the whole Harry Potter kind of style. Even though I was
and so in the middle of that, what were you reading? What were your favorite books at that time in terms of fiction or genre?
I think I've always been drawn into history. I've always been a big fan of history. So any form of that was good for me. So I think, of course, I read all of those children's books as a kid. Also like 1,000 Arabian Nights, Alf Layla wa Layla. Also like at school, I used to love all the assignments, like Kalila wa Dimna. I remember like also like Zainab, which was sort of like the first Arab novel I read. I used to read a lot in Arabic.
So you were reading mainly in Arabic at that time?
Yeah, I think throughout my childhood I used to read a lot in Arabic. I remember I think one novel that really I think impacted me as a kid was Africa by I forgot his name. Amin Malouf, by Amin Malouf, who's a Lebanese author, and he writes this novel about Africa, who's sort of like based on a true character, a true person, and so he traveled throughout, from Grenada all the way across the North Africa. And then what was really amazing about him, I think Amin Malouf does that a lot, is his characters always witness the fall of a civilization, and so as he travels throughout the region, he sees the falls of the different civilizations, and that really impressed me. And I think I read a lot of stuff like that as well.
And when you were writing, you said, which language did you use in the writing?
Arabic.
Is it Arabic at that time?
Yeah, I used to write everything in Arabic.
Arabic, okay.
Yes.
And when was do you remember your first attempt at writing in English?
I think it was in university, I think, because there's then one. So I wrote all throughout my high school years, and then maybe the last year probably I was getting a little bit busy, so I stopped for a couple of years. But then also in high school I started to read in English a lot. I started with like those graded readers because I used to spend a lot of time on the bus in high school, and so I would start with those mini graded readers, and then when I finished all of those at the library at the school where I was taking the Access program. And so after that, I graduated to bigger novels. I think I remember reading, Tom Sawyer, also like Huckleberry Finn. And I think in university, of course, I was doing literature and civilization, which I loved. But then that's when I think I started writing short stories in English. I think first thing was just like another variation of a story I had written in Arabic. I wrote it in English, and then I started with a couple of those short stories.
And what was the motivation behind writing? I mean, I know that something that all writers want is to be read, of course. Well, I guess that this is one important motivation, and perhaps to get feedback. So what was the motivation behind writing for you? Were there like some of your friends who you gave what you wrote to, or did you get feedback, or were you doing it because you love doing it?
That's the thing. I think there's a lot of writers. I'm not the only one who love to write for the sake of writing, not so much to be read. Okay. And for so many years, that was my case. I think up until I wrote this novel, I was like, for most of my years, nobody even knew that I wrote. That sort of it was my passion. This was definitely a surprise for so many people when I started announcing stuff about the competition. I feel like part of it was probably being protective of your work and being afraid that somebody will criticize it, they will not like you, that they will not like it, they will think it's terrible work. Probably a lot of it is that. But I think I didn't care as much about getting published as much as just getting those stories out there. There was one opportunity in high school, sort of, to get a short story published, but that didn't work. I was definitely excited for that, but I think even when it didn't work, it didn't stop me. I just continued on writing and writing, because for me, I think there's always a story that's sort of like prickling in my brain, in my mind. I think I go to bed every night thinking of at least a scene in a story. Sometimes the story that I'm writing, and sometimes the story that I'm not writing. I can't remember any time in my life what I spent without. I think sometimes I would go like 2 or 3 years without writing, but then there's always a story developing in my mind, and I feel like it's more of like a need to get it out on paper, so then you free it for other stories. I think more than the desire to get read.
Yeah, I'm asking this question because I guess that there are a lot of people out there, whether in writing in English or Arabic or even in French, who are like you, secret writers, right? And then for many years. And so do you think that this is a good thing, or that no, they should like in one way or another come out as writers and let people read their writing, whether on social media, and so that they can get feedback and perhaps a little bit accelerate the process of this long process of learning how to write?
Definitely. I think if I had to do it again, I would definitely come out earlier. I think it's very important. Like writing is a lonely job or lonely work, which I think most of us don't mind.
Very isolating. Five in the morning. Come on.
Yes, just all those distractions off, which is good. I think there's definitely a good thing there. But definitely, I think there is a lot of value in sort of like the community, and I think with Sand Roses, with my novel, I'm so grateful to so many people who have read it and gave me feedback. We call those alpha readers and beta readers. So the people who read the very first draft or the second draft of your novel and then give you feedback. I've actually found a lot of support even from online communities, like especially like in English speaking countries like in the UK, especially in the US. You find a lot of there's websites for writers, there is groups on social media, and all of those people do. I think they just support. There's actually a group called Writers Supporting Writers. There's a lot of those and stuff like that. Yeah. And so what they do is they find resources, they share trainings or blogs or posts or tips. But they also sometimes you go there to look for a critique partner, another aspiring author who's writing something similar to yours. And then you would, swap, chapters or short stories or whole novels. and then you would read each other's work and give feedback. And that's been very valuable to me, honestly. I think I find complete strangers, from Ireland, from the US, from Algeria as well, who were able to read my work and give me feedback. And then also some of my close friends. I think that's the tricky thing. I think, especially when it comes to people around you, you probably want to be a little bit careful, not because, not careful as in people who treat you differently, but I think, you don't want to, of course, if your mom or dad or, dear friend wants to read the novel and then they're going to give you positive feedback, then it's perfect. It's good. But then also, you want to give it to people who know this, the craft, they're able to comment at least objectively, they're not just going to say, this is perfect, go sell it to the world. And then it's a piece of trash, or the opposite.
You want them to give you like constructive feedback and criticism. But this would take me to my next question, in fact, which is writing in English in Algeria would certainly limit your readership, certainly, because, well, there aren't many speakers of the language, and consequently, there aren't many readers of the language. And even if there are readers, well, they read like general texts, but they don't read literature. Matter of fact, even literature in Arabic, or perhaps in French, which is second language and Arabic first language in Algeria, even those writing in these two languages, which are spoken by many people, find that they don't have many readers. That is, they don't have a large audience. So I guess my question here is, why did you choose English to write your novel? And did you think of this problematic of readership, or it was an opportunity for you to come out and you seized it and that's it?
I think there's so much to unpack there, Jalil. These are all very good questions.
Yeah.
I think one, commenting on the markets, I think definitely I agree with you. I think readership in general is very limited in Algeria. I think there is, especially compared to other countries, I think we as a nation, we just simply do not read. Of course, there's a lot of people, there's probably thousands of people who read, but it's nothing compared to other cultures where readership is really sort of like part of their everyday life.
It's an industry. It's a
whole
that.
industry.
It's an industry.
And publishers don't lie about it. Algeria is not an interesting market for publishers, to be honest. And the result is our own publishers here in Algeria, they struggle to stay alive because they can't even make enough money for them to stay alive as a business, because at the end of the day, it's a business. And these are people who work in French or English. So yes, as you said, readership in English is even more limited. I think we see a lot more and more every day.
Yeah.
I think English, sort of like, people who are into English, into learning language, practicing it, I think they're more likely to be reading than people who are sort of like into French or Arabic, I don't know, in general. But that's still very limited. And I've actually approached a few edition houses who are nice enough to respond in Algeria, some publishing houses, publishers who basically said they don't have the capacity to edit a book in English, which I understand. I think it's a whole different thing.
I don't want to go there yet, because that would be a topic for a bit later on about the publishing, story of your story with publishing. But I just want to focus now on why did you choose to write in English and the question of readership.
I think it made sense to me. I think when I was writing Arabic, there was no question about that. It was natural. I was reading Arabic because that was sort of my language I was using all the time, and so I wrote directly in Arabic. But then, as an adult, as studying English, I started to read a lot more in English, and then with my work, I think my entire adult life I've been working in English language environment, which means I speak English most of the time at work or on meetings or if I'm doing training. I definitely write probably hundreds of pages every year between between emails, reports, curriculum, you name it. I write a lot in English, and so I got really into the habit of writing, and so that I was getting much easier there. And so when I started, so when I was picking up the writing one more time, I think I felt much more comfortable writing in English. And actually, I started. So there was a couple of short stories that were before Santa Rosa's, but then Santa Rosa started when I was taking a creative writing class while I was in the US doing the professional fellowship program, the Humphrey Fellowship program. Mm-hmm. I was taking a class on creative writing with actually published author Elizabeth Kadetsky.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. And
yeah,
so
that's nice.
And that was really, I think, sort of like there was a moment that really changed my passion for writing, and I started to think of it a little more professionally. I think I got to interact with some authors. Yeah.
So let me seize up on that and follow up my question on writing in English. So certainly the fact that you have won the prize, third place, and also the fact that you have finished the novel in the first place, certainly that means that you have gained certain professionalism in writing. That is, you were an amateur writer, writing for yourself, for pleasure, to pass time perhaps. But then what is the difference? Where was the difference in like passing to this stage where you become a professional based on your experience with the course that you have taken in creative writing? What does, and I'm asking you this question because out there is someone listening, he or she, and they are passionate about writing and they don't know how to transition to go beyond being an amateur writer into a professional one?
That's a very good question. And I think I still don't think of myself as a professional writer yet, but I think definitely I've increased that skill over the years. And I think one thing I do differently than, right now as opposed to when I was younger is I feel like, as you become professional, you become a little bit more a better critique more than before you become a better writer. In a way, you start to look at any story, if you read a story or you watch, even if you watch a movie, because a lot of those structures are almost similar, you start to sort of get the chance to break it down into pieces. And so you can say, oh, well, here's where the author, or the director or the writer is working on characterization. Here's where we're working on the plot. Here's where, this is the part of the plot where the character needs to do this. And so we start to sort of recognize patterns in other stories. And then you're able to say, well, this is a character that's well developed, or this is a story that's more based on a plot than characterization. But also you start to think more critically of your own writing. So when you're at a piece, you start to, I think, especially as amateur writers, and I still do that a lot, I think you start to go you want to impress yourself. You want to write really beautiful language and prose, and this is a really fancy sentence. And then I think with time, you learn to sort of crush those words and say, if it's not moving the story forward, then it's not really working. And it's just, this is just me showing off, and I need to really cross it off. And I definitely did a lot of editing. And so, you become a better editor in a way, as in because I think your entire life, you're just spinning stories and in a way, sort of like throwing up stories.
Exactly. This is, you are like, and exactly. And this is why I said that we want to address those up and coming writers, young writers who are like a raw force. And then all you need to do is perhaps to channel this force into a particular direction. And so I want to ask you a question that would perhaps really go to the point in terms of the process of writing, which we'll come back to in more details, perhaps when we discuss the novel in a few minutes, which is, when does a writer know that a novel is finished?
I think one saying, I think I've heard from my supervisor, who heard it from a teacher, is a piece of writing is never done. It's a continuous work in progress. And I certainly think about that. I'm still so very much editing Santa Rosa's, working with my editor, and it will never be done. It will be done when it's out there on a shelf and people are reading it. That will be one way of saying it's finalized. But then I also know a lot of writers, like even Stephen King went back and revised, I think, at least The Stand, one of his most famous novels. There was always, new editions and new versions. And I think even at work, even outside of fiction writing, my colleagues always laugh at me, because if they give me my own writing 10 times, I would edit it 10 times.
Sure.
And then sometimes they go, "Oh, you wrote this," but I'm like, yeah, still, I'm gonna edit it. I feel like every single time you look at it, there's always areas for improvement, which is good. I think, I don't think of that as frustrating. I think of that as proof that, there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm asking this question really to relate it to the earlier question about when do we come out? And sometimes it seems like you are all the time dissatisfied what you have written, that you say, I'm not ready, this is not perfect, this is not good, I'm not going to put this out there because this is going to have criticism, or this is and I think that what we see with your example, or your examples and experiences, and the way you have talked about this right now, is that at a certain point you have to put it out and then give it to others, and there is always room for improvement over time. And so I think that this is a very important question to consider for young writers who are out there afraid to publish, or not, perhaps not even publish, but just share what they have written.
Or at least, I think, share their passion. I think there's a lot of value in just telling the world that, you enjoy writing, because then, honestly, I think one really good thing that has come out of me telling other people about it is I've received a lot of support, which is always valuable. So, like, people will be sharing with you resources or opportunities, or even like you would probably connect with other people who love to write, and then you could do something together, like be critique partners or something. But then when it comes to certain piece of writing, whether it's a short story or a novel, I think at one point you probably want to keep it to yourself, because you don't want people to give you too many opinions before you're done with it. But then at least once you're done, maybe give it one more revision and then say, okay, well, it's not final, but at least it's ready for a few people. That's why we call it alpha readers, beta readers, and then you continue to have probably more and more people to read it each time, and then you don't have to take people's opinions. I think I've rejected a lot of people's feedback because I didn't agree with that. But then when there's when 3 or 4 people read it and then they give you the same comment, then probably you should look at it and consider that opinion.
Yeah, and the other thing is that a debut novel or a first novel or a first writing published is not the last word. I think that the career of any writer, fiction or non-fiction, is supposed to be a series of works. And so when you publish a first novel, you see how it is received, and perhaps from that you get feedback and you try to improve on that, and you publish a second one, and perhaps it would be the third one, which would be successful in terms of like readership and commercial success. So I just want to put that out there for those who are, again, secret writers. Just come out, please. We want to talk to you.
And if I could, exactly, and definitely, I think if I could add to that, it's very important. I think remember I said the best advice, the best tip that I got from writers is to protect the process. The second advice is there's no other way around writing. I think if you want to improve your skill, you can't just write a piece of writing and expect it to get better. You have to write and write and write. I think there's a lot of, imagery about it. They say you need to first get all the bad stuff out there before you get to the good stuff. A lot of writers don't publish their first novel or second. Sometimes it gets to the third or fourth novel before they publish them. And then they're able to go back to the first novels and then revise them and then, get them published. So definitely just keep on writing, I think, is the best advice, because it's the only way to really get there.
So let's look at how that worked for you with your novel Sand Roses. And so I know it's always a bit, not difficult, but, it's scary for any writer to give a summary of his or her work without spoilers. So try not to do that so that you keep a little bit of suspense there. So if you could please summarize a little bit and tell us a little bit about your novel.
Sure. So Sand Roses is set in 1930s Busada in Algeria. And it was in a time where a very unique culture of Dulad Nail dancers was pretty common. And I think we'll probably go back and talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then so we open the story with two sisters, Salima and Fahima, who travel from their village to Busada to become successful dancers. They're both young, they're with their mother, and they're bursting with dreams of success. They have different definitions of success. Fahima wants to travel the world, to be able to dance at different places around the world, and also get paintings and stuff. She's all about the fancy stuff. Sorry, I think we have to edit that one.
It's okay.
She's all about the fancy stuff. Salima's dreams are a little bit different. She wants to collect her dowry, go back to her village, find a husband, get married, and start a family of her own. And through that, both of them, they need to actually work and be successful to be able to realize their dreams. They've grown up hearing stories of different Tunalia dancers who've made it in Busada being the city of joy. They're charmed by the whole city. But then they soon realize that it's a city of horrors as well, because there's a lot of crime. There's a lot of attempts to get, at their jewelry. As they try to, there's people who don't let them, if they want to work at if they want to dance, it's not that easy. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of confrontation against the French army, who's trying to sort of control this business. And so I think all of their dreams adjust a little bit, and then before we know it, they find themselves in a position where they kill a French soldier by mistake in self-defense. And as they try to hide that crime, they end up in bigger and bigger crimes, and then before they know it, they are too deep in it, and they end up joining a struggle against the colonizing army, because it's a matter of saving their lives or saving the lives of the people around them. And that's not a lot of spoiling. I think then we see how they struggle first to make it as successful dancers, but also how they struggle to hide their crime and survive in this world of horrors.
Yeah. So the novel is a historical novel, and there's an eternal debate as far as literature is concerned and literary works about the extent to which any novel is historical, because we say it's fiction, so it's historical. What are the boundaries between the two? So to what extent do you think that your novel is, I don't want to say an accurate, but a representation, a broad representation of that era?
That's a very important question, and that's a very good point. I think a lot of people, they jump to, they judge probably, especially they could say, well, this is historical fiction, but it's not historically accurate. And I think we need to remember that, first and foremost, it's fiction, so there is a lot of, so the author is probably going to be taking some liberty. And then it depends on every author. I think Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, which is not even a historical novel, she was very strict with herself because she did not include any anything that didn't happen in history, even though it's not a historical novel. And I know a lot of other authors, like I'm a big fan of Ken Follett, C.J. Sampson, who write a lot of historical fiction, and they do very extensive research to, to be as accurate as possible. Same for me. I was able to do a lot of research online. I was able to meet or attend workshops by historians. Two of them, at least, were from Busada, so they actually know the culture, and they were able to know. One of them, I think Farhat Barkahum, if I remember the name correctly. She's a historian from Busada who writes a lot about the whole Red Nail dancers culture. So I was able to at least confirm the existence of the culture, the themes, I think their lifestyle. But sadly, in Algeria, I think there is limited access to information around that. And so, one, we need to remember that the characters are fictional. So they're not supposed to be a representation of any specific person or a person, especially like a historical personality. They're work of my own imagination. But the things they do, the way they live, the struggles they faced were similar to the Red Nail dancers who were at the time living in Busada. And that was based on my research. And so I think I was able to even get the map of the city of Busada back in the 1930s. But then you get also to the, I think I was able to get some archive pictures, or maps, or so you see, where the hospital was, where the hotel was, where the cafes, and what they looked like. A lot of pictures and videos of Red Nail dancers, so you can see what their dresses were like, with the interaction, at the market, what the market was like, what it felt like to be going to the sounds and the images that you can see.
And here, I would just like here to perhaps link the process, the work that you have done before or while writing, to becoming a professional. How can you link the two? Something that we have talked about before, because a lot of people imagine or think that writing is just about inspiration. That is, you sit down, you take a pen and a paper or a keyboard, and you wait for ideas to come. Well, that's part of it. The muses would come to you at a certain point, but that's not the whole story. That's not even the big part of the story. The big part of the story is, as you mentioned before, drafting and writing and rewriting and editing, but also doing a lot of research. So I guess my question there, which relates to the way in which you have changed as a writer once you have taken the course that you have talked about, is what are some of the ways in which you have developed this sense of research, of working on your background, on your setting, on going out there to the field and looking for sources, which we know that even someone like Shakespeare back at that time did, before most of his first plays were historical plays, where he had to go back and check the history and read the history and study the history before writing it or putting it into fiction or into plays. So can you talk a little bit more about that, of course, and its importance to waking up at 5 and writing?
Yeah, and I think it definitely helps. Like I said, I keep saying I'm a big fan of history, and actually the reason I started writing this novel is I accidentally ran into this podcast about, I think, it was a podcast by a French historian who was talking about the Red Nail dancers in the Kasbah, and it was just, she just mentioned it in passing. I was like, wait a minute. I didn't hear about this. And then, I was an adult. I had never heard of this culture before. And I was a little bit angry because, I was like, how come this is not something we talk about? And then I was fascinated by that, and I did some more research. And the more I did, the story sort of like started to take form. But then I think at the beginning it was sort of like just like just key events taking place, and then I needed to know more for to populate my world. What do my people look like? What do they dress like? What do they do every day? What do they have at home? Where do they sleep? And then I think at the beginning I just did a lot of research, sort of like just to populate that. And so, like I said, I would be reading books or articles or watching videos when they're available on YouTube, especially like archive from the archives, or like going through. Actually, I think I even went through archive newspapers from the 1930s, looking for just to see what were people reading about in terms of the news, what was happening. Which was very helpful because then I was able to first select movies that were shot in Busada in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Or like how people were talking about, like how the French were talking about Algerians, what kind of pictures. And I think when you do research about, especially the dancers, the first thing you realize, and people already talk about it, is there is so much more visual archiving than narrative. So you see a lot more pictures and videos and paintings than sort of like documented narratives about it. So like people, or at least like what survived. And so Etienne Dine did write sort of like a short story about it. There is now people looking into that culture. There is a couple of novels set in like I said, in Biskra or Busada. But it's not as like, especially when you compare things like like similar cultures like in Egypt or like the the geishas of Japan. There is so much more documentation around those cultures. But in Algeria, I think sadly it's not that accessible or available.
Sure. So let me ask you this: the setting is Busada, 1930s. So during the time when Algeria was a French colony, and you talked in your presentation of the novel that this is a novel in which you have French characters in the sense of French presence, and also Algerian characters, the girls in particular, resisting the French. So in what way is the novel post-colonial, in a sense of not only resistance, but also in a sense of a certain image that you have of Busada, for example, given by the Orientalists, or of the Algerian character, not only of the Algerian setting, but also of the Algerian character. How is it, in a way, a response to writings and the representations from that time, especially as we have just discussed, Etienne Dine, or the painters or writers at that time were representing Algeria in terms of place and time, but also Algerian character in a certain way. So how does your novel in a way write back to that?
I think I'll be lying if I say that wasn't in my mind throughout the whole process, because I think a lot of it was post-colonial in a way that, first, I think I was making conscious attempts to portray, I think, all of the atrocities that the French army did in Algeria. And then if you read into the novel, you see a lot of violence against Algerians, a lot of even slaughter or like injustice against not just the dancers, but then the community in general in Busada. Or even in the villages out there. And this is even before the War of Independence. So, and of course, this isn't new. I think there's a lot of documentation around that. I think also, in a way, I tried to make the Algerian characters a lot more complex, sort of to make them more individuals. Yeah, so for me, it was important to give them complexity as individuals, give them dreams, give them desires, give them background history, give them a life as individuals, fears.
What was the most difficult thing in the process of writing? I mean, was it the research that you have done, or the coming up with the story, that is with the events and putting them in the order, or was it the style, that is, in terms of writing in English itself? What was the most daunting thing out there?
I think probably the most daunting thing is I put myself in a difficult situation by, like, as a new author, new writer, I shouldn't have. What I did with the novel is I did a dual timeline. So we have almost two stories running at the same time, one in 1931 and one in 1934. So in 1931, we're seeing them going to town, trying to make it as dancers, finding the horrors, trying to deal with it, sort of like toughening up. But in 1934, they have just killed the French soldier, and they're trying to deal with the consequences of that. And so the two stories develop in parallel. And then
and
they,
did you use, for that, did you use like flashbacks or?
No, it's like one chapter at a time. So one chapter 1931, one chapter 34. And then eventually they meet, which was so much fun to work. But then also it was a trap, because then at one point, I needed the sort of like an outline to keep track of it, because at one point, I go like, oh, have these characters met before, or is this the first time they're meeting?
Oh, yeah.
Or like things like,
sure.
oh, what was she wearing on that day? Because they need to go back to her, to the exact same dress.
Yeah, and that's my next question. How do you usually write? Do you like use an app, or do you use an app on the computer, of course, or your laptop? Do you use I think there is one called Ulysses, Ulysses, Scrivener, or do you just use Word?
Plain Word. What I like to use is also an outline, and that's also in a different document. And in writing there is this whole sort of like two parties. You're either they call it either a planner or a pantser. So like, do you outline everything in advance, or do you just fly by the seat of your pants? So like, do you just like walk?
So what was your process for you?
I think I'm a little bit in the middle. I'm more of a plan. So like, I like to plan, but then based on the character more than the sort of like just events. And then I develop that plan more and more before I start writing. Like, for example, right now I'm working on a different novel, and then it's already like 16 or 17 pages, but it's still an outline, because it gives me a lot of flexibility, and I can develop sections here and there. Until I'm really satisfied, then I can actually start writing a novel. But also the outline is very flexible, so like I'm not going to stick to it. It changed 100 times between the first time I started, so I can keep track of the changes more than to restrict myself.
And do you think that, and for you, do you use do you have like a certain process with keeping track of the events and the characters? Do you like color code them or something like that, or you work a lot on editing, reading and reading again and re-editing?
I tried different methods, but I feel like reading and editing is my best friend. I also like to leave comments for myself. And I think some of my friends who saw some of the drafts were laughing because I would talk to myself in the comments, especially like if especially I think at one point I would make a huge change. And that's one way where which means I need to go back through everything, I don't know, somebody met somebody again, and then I need to go back and then change all of that and make it look like they haven't, this is not the first time meeting. And I know when I get back to it, I'm going to be so angry because it's going to be so difficult. So I leave a comment to myself with a smiley, going like, you're going to love
it. The creative process is really fascinating for me. I've been always interested in creative people. How do they do that? How do they organize their thoughts, etc., etc.? Especially that I know that the most creative people are those who have many things going on in their mind at the same time. Like their mind is like swirling, and they have many ideas, and they say this and that. And how do they try, again, as we said earlier, to channel that into something something significant is really fascinating for me. But let me ask you a question about that. Now, English is not your first language, is not your native language. It is your second or third language. And so in terms of writing itself, do you think that you think in English and then you write down, or do you feel like there are times when you are like thinking in Arabic, I mean in Derja, and then trying to express that in English? Because this is, I think, another, I don't know if it's a difficulty or if it is something hard, but for you, how has it been? And for some other people, that's the easy part. But for you,
I think when it comes to writing, I do think in English, and when I'm imagining scenes and dialogues, I'm imagining them in English, probably to a fault. I'm saying to a fault because some of the feedback that I've received, especially from native speakers, is, you know, when they read the dialogue, it sometimes doesn't. So like, I would write it in English, and then I would go back and try to make it a little bit. I would make it sound a little bit more contextualized. So like, I add in some words to make it, you know, to remind the reader that these are not, you know, British or American people, right, speaking.
Yeah.
These are French or Algerians in the 1930s. So I'd add in some words here and there just to make it a little bit more contextualized. But also, it's very important to also make it understandable, because I think if you think in another language and translate, it might be a little. I think it might be a little weird. It might sound like it's translated language. So I think it's important to get to that point where you're able to think directly in that language. Because I feel like if you're imagining the stories in Arabic, you should probably write them in Arabic, right? And then have somebody else do the translation, and then they would worry about the language. I wouldn't, at this point, I wouldn't dream of writing in Arabic or French, but then I would love to have somebody, I think eventually have a translator work on them, but then I would love to read the final product to be able to get that nuances. I think one of the criticisms that I got, which is fair enough, I think, even in the swear words, because again, these are Ulanai dancers who were living in a very sort of rough environment. When you see videos and stuff, you hear actually, you know, they would be using foul language on the street and stuff, which is understandable. And so as I try to depict that in English, some of the criticism I got is, well, this sounds like you know, sort of like an American redneck swearing. And then, so that's some of the things that go back and forth to sort of like, which is it's supposed to be a stupid thing, but I feel like it's one of the things that could make a difference.
I think it's important. We talked about the Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And one of the things that fascinated me with that novel is the extent to which it represents the language of that time. How do you see the future of writing in English in Algeria? Is there a space?
Definitely, I think it's time. It's time for us to start reading and writing in English. I think there's definitely a lot of people doing it. I've seen a few young authors publish in English. I think especially through what we call independent publishing. I think some of the independent publishers who it's different formats where you basically pay the publisher to publish for you, and there's a lot of controversy around it. But at least I think, you know, the books are out there. People are writing in it. There's people reading it, which is good. I think there needs to be a lot more than that in terms of support for the authors, which means, you know, I think publishers, especially traditional publishers, need to sort of get the capacity to edit books in English. I think we need to do a lot more marketing and support. I feel like competitions like this, like the Island Prize, is a very valuable.
Exactly. I think so. Yeah.
So if there is a way for us to sort of like, you know, train young writers or give them competitions to compete, and then sort of just give them the chance to get noticed. I think that definitely will help. And
I think that the theme of our conversation today, we talked earlier about secret writing, and about the secret writer, and about the need to come out. I think what we were revolving around was this idea of support, community support. And I think that one way in which you feel that you belong to community is when you win, for example, a prize along with the other four writers, and perhaps earlier with many other writers who have of course, been candidate to win this prize. And so I guess that would take me to my next question. So you talked earlier about what makes your novel Algerian, and we talked about the 1930s, about Boussaada, about Oulad Nail, about representation, about French colonization, etc. That what makes your novel Algerian. But you have won a prize for Africa. So what makes your novel African?
There is a lot of debate. I think there is a lot of debate around Algeria and probably North Africa being part of Africa or not. And part of that is, I think, us constantly looking up, looking northwards towards Europe. And I think, I get that, ask that question a lot. I think, when I'm traveling, people ask me where I'm from, the whole conversation of Algeria, where is Algeria, North Africa? We don't look African. I think there is two bits to that. I think there is the world seeing Africa as one country, going back to that, like less characteristics, less specific or sort of like complex parts of Africa. But then there is, I think, different sides of it. There's different cultures, there's different languages, there's different people who look differently. And also, I think in even Algeria, I think we're not so much connected with our African continent, as in, when you go to politically, economically, or especially culturally, I think we're pretty disconnected from the rest of the continent. But I think opportunities like this help us, one, reconnect as a continent. And I think I've really enjoyed that whole process. I think just having my work, read by authors from South Africa, from Nigeria, from Tanzania, I think that has been a true pleasure, and especially seeing how they're making their own successes elsewhere. And so that's a good way to connect as a continent, but also it's a good way for us to tell the world of our diversity. That Africa.
What has been the feedback from African countries?
I think. So the good thing is the jury was comprised of authors from different parts of Africa. And so I think for me, I felt like I was a winner the minute I was longlisted. At that point, I was like, I don't care if I make it past this phase because I already feel like I'm a winner. And the reason for that is because, out of 100 submissions, they were able to longlist 10 people, and then we submitted the full novel, and then those were read by authors. And for me, just thinking that, there is a published author out there reading my work is like, oh my God. But then also, I think, hearing their feedback in terms of, I think what they really appreciated was telling them about a side of Africa, side of Algeria that they don't really know of. I think we are not, we're used to writing in Arabic or French, and not all of it is accessible by the rest of the continent. And so Algeria is very little known in the world in general.
Did you have before an interest in the Sahara or?
Yeah, here's the thing. I think definitely, especially I think through my work, I travel a lot across Algeria and definitely all across the deserts. We've met so many times in Urgla. And I love it. I think it's definitely charming. I can't think of anybody who's visited the Sahara and has not loved it. And then I think there is also, especially in a place, I think in general in Algeria, but also especially in the south, there's always hidden stories and hidden untold stories, and I think that always fascinates me. And to be honest, I feel like when I first stumbled on the story, I think I was actually hesitant because I didn't want it to be just another exotic story that says, "Oh, here's an exotic story of women dancing."
Sure, and this is why I asked you earlier about what makes it different from the Orientalists, and the extent to which it is Algerian, the extent to which it is a representation of the era, because many people would think that once they read Sand Roses, this is about an exotic place at an exotic time. So I think that I have not yet read the novel, but I assume that you have taken care of that. That is, so that it
I hope
doesn't
so.
come
I
out
hope
like
so.
that.
I hope so, and that was a big concern of mine, and I'm still open to criticism about that. I'm sure. I think I keep saying this. When I was doing research, I was surprised by the level of denial I feel by a lot of Algerians regarding the whole existence of the whole culture. I think,
So
if you watch,
what kind of pushback did you receive from Algerian readers?
well, that hasn't happened yet, but because it
Okay.
hasn't been out there yet. But I think when I'm reading articles or watching videos on YouTube, if you go through the comment section, it's sometimes nasty because people they just jump to say this isn't true. They did not exist. This is the fabrication of the French colonial system.
I've seen that. Yeah.
And so in a way, I think at one point I asked myself the same question. I was like, am I just strengthening a stereotype that didn't exist? And so I was able to talk to, like I said, to historians. One of them wrote a book, and he's from Busada, and the other historian has also published heavily about, I think, the Red Canary culture, and I think also talked about people, not necessarily historian, but like people from the Red Canary culture. Everybody from Busada, they recognize that, they know that it existed. They don't deny it because they've lived through it, especially because until the 1980s that was pretty much the culture. But I think people who it speaks to a level of ignorance about the whole existence of the Lanari dancers culture, and so that's why we always jump to those, to the defense. I think of, because also I like to think that their existence, it's not fair for these dancers to carry the whole reputation of the entire country. They did not think that, hey, I'm here to represent the whole nation. I'm here to uphold the values of my nation. They were there just like everybody else did. They're trying to have a successful life, to realize their dreams and live happily. And I think it's important to highlight that as a complex character. And I think that's why I try to do is to make them real and individual and feel like real human beings, not like heroes and representatives of the nation.
Talk to me about your present and future projects as far as writing is concerned.
So far, I think the big priority is for me to continue through the process and get it out there published. I'm currently working with Holland House, which have huge, immense pleasure to be working with editor Robert Piet, who is still, we're in touch. We're trying to sort of figure out different ways of making it a little bit more adaptable to the market, and so hopefully to get it ready for publication by next year, and that's also exciting, the whole publication process. But also, whenever I get a chance, 5 a.m. again, I'm working on a part 2 of the novel. I think I had some time when I was playing with a couple of ideas, but then I settled on one, part 2 for it, where I take some of the characters from the novel, they go to a different city, a different time, 20 years later. And then we have this whole new story. Also, I think it comes back the story about resistance again, and also story, I think, about people with a lot of background and a lot of different sort of conflicting backgrounds, if you could say. I'm not allowed to say a lot about it yet because it's not even but I think that's what I'm saying.
But it's a work in progress, and you shouldn't talk about it yet. But
I think it's not ready yet.
Yeah. But earlier we mentioned that you wanted to talk about publishing, and so can you say a word about that? Did you find difficulties publishing before? Did you have any experience with publishing in Algerian publishing houses?
Yes, so I've tried the whole publication route. First, like I said, my very first attempt in Algeria was when I was in high school. I was trying to publish. I talked to this publisher from my neighborhood who said, "Yeah, I'll publish your short story." And so I wrote it and edited it and gave it to him. And then also I had a friend of mine. She did the drawings. It was a very exciting project, but it never saw the light. I think kept going back and forth, but it never worked. But then it wasn't until very recently. Well, I did get, I think, my work published in a couple of sort of like, there was a magazine, there was like some student work as well. But then recently with Santa Roses, I think I started to discover the whole publication world for especially English language writing, which means basically in the UK, especially the UK and the US. And it's a difficult world. It's I think it's a whole different world of publication, because first I was like, well, if it's in English, then maybe I should give it a try by sort of like an English language publisher. But it's very competitive. There's thousands of writers trying to make it through, and there's a whole different process. You need to get an agent. Like very few people get.
Yeah, this is one of the things I think that you would have with the prize, right? Contact with an agent, and I think this is one further step into professionalism that we were talking about earlier. And this is just to perhaps for those young up and coming writers who of course dream about getting their work published. The important thing to bear in mind that all of this is a process, and then in that it takes time, but that it's not something difficult or impossible. Yeah, I think that from your experience, we can see that it can work. It can definitely work.
It can definitely work. I think with a lot of persistence, but also I think a lot of patience, because it takes sometimes years, and also I think you need to be able to go back and revise your work. I think again, one of the mistakes that I made as a rookie, as a new writer, is I wrote a super long novel, and I think at one point in the middle of it, I wonder how long the novel is supposed to be. And then
this is why I asked you earlier, when do we know a novel is finished?
I know. And so like when I looked it up, it was, people saying for historical novel it's supposed to be between 80 and 100,000 words, which is around like 300 to 350 pages, almost 400.
How many pages is it actually now?
Yeah, that's the thing. So right now it's in the 400s.
400.
A little bit lower.
For a debut novel, that's.
I know. And then you should have seen it when it first started. It was at almost 700. It was like 180,000, double the length it was supposed to be. And so first I was in the middle of writing it, so I was able to I couldn't help it. I had to finish it. I didn't want to make a rush, and so I finished writing it. Ended up being 180,000. And then I went into slashing it down. I went all the way down to, I think, 160. I tried a few agents. They were like, they either didn't respond or they just said it's too long. And then I was reading more about it. I was saying there's no way you could publish it with 160,000. I did some more cutting. So I think I went all the way down to 140, then 120. And that's what I think I started to get more responses, more agents interested in reading it, even though sometimes they weren't interested in pursuing it, like being represented in my work. And then it was until I got I think to 120, and that's when I participated with in the competition. And I was able to get the third place, and I think that helped. So I think if I had to do it again, I would be a lot more careful about word count, because
and I think that in my opinion, if you had to do it again, you would have done it the same way, because it means that you've had this experience and you are going to do it again better with your second, third, fourth, fifth, and whatever the number novel. That's the most important thing. But for a first novel, that's, I think, wonderful that it went this way. And I don't think that if you had to do it again, you had to do it any differently. In my opinion, no. That's just the way it had to be, so that you come to a certain realization, especially concerning your next novels. Otherwise, you would have tried it with your second or third novel. So I think that, and you are a young writer, so you have all the time to do it again better.
Well, I think that's the value in the whole tip about you have to write. You have to keep writing because you have to make all those mistakes. Otherwise,
you have to.
If you wait until
there's no other way.
40, you're still going to make those mistakes. So you better make, and learn from them and then move on.
Exactly. Hamza.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Congratulations again on winning the 3rd place for the Island Prize for your fiction, Sand Roses. One theme, as I said earlier, that would come out of our conversation today is the importance of support. And I think that it can start with these little steps where we have a conversation about people's work, about writers' work, and then it can, little by little, and over a long period of time, perhaps we can build a whole industry behind promoting books and especially supporting and promoting writers, young writers like you, and especially in English. So congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'll see you again when I see you, inshallah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.